when Biden announced the withdrawal of troops, there was suddenly this wave of media commentary, talking, as you said, about women and girls and what kind of fate they might face under the Taliban, talking about how there was almost certainly going to be a humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan following the withdrawal. And as you pointed out, I think that if there's anything the last 20 or more years have taught us, it's that we should be critical, or suspicious at least, of this idea of so-called humanitarian intervention. And I've also noticed a lot of progressives even saying, or invoking the Pottery Barn rule, which is you break it, you buy it, right? And I think the idea is that they don't feel that it's right for the US to create this disaster in Afghanistan and then just pack up and leave. In light of all of this commentary, I'm wondering if there are other humanitarian projects that you think progressives should be supporting that, aside from, ending sanctions and admitting more refugees, that don't fall into this trap of continuing the intervention?
Well, first of all, I should say that I'm sure there are people on the ground in Afghanistan who really are committed to human rights, to rights of women, rights of others, but they're not the policy makers. Mm-hmm. That's always true. There are plenty of good people who are working on the ground, just as there were under the Russian intervention. Good people working on the ground, concerned with women's rights, concerned with human rights, didn't justify the invasion, but that was happening. But we're talking about policy, not good people who are trying to do something. The first step in humanitarian intervention is to stop destroying. If we can stop destroying, terrorizing, using our muscle to intimidate everyone, whatever the consequences, that'll be a big step forward. And then if we can get that far, you can start thinking what we can do that might be of some value. And there are things. So take George W. Bush, who was responsible for the invasion of Afghanistan and invasion of Iraq that followed later, millions of people killed, countries destroyed, the whole region wrecked through ethnic conflict that didn't exist before. But he did some good things. His health programs in Africa, for example, were quite helpful. And okay, fine, that's humanitarian intervention. Support some health programs in Africa. We could carry out a humanitarian program right now by making vaccines available to Latin America, Caribbean, Africa, Asia. Actually, the US is doing a little better than Europe is on this. Europe is even worse than us in many respects. Biden has at least taken some small steps, but not the major steps, the steps called for by the people's vaccine movement, freeing up the exorbitant intellectual property rights, patent rights that not only patent the product, but also the process, something new introduced by Clinton and other neoliberal fanatics in the World Trade Organization rules. Radical violation of free trade, never existed in the past. Ridiculous rights that support huge profits for drug monopolies. Oh, well, we can eliminate that. Allow other countries to manufacture the vaccines, which were mostly created on public funding anyway. Let other countries investigate them. Their own engineers can probably figure out better processes than the drug companies have, make them available to the countries that need them. You could do that. As I say, Europe's even worse than we are, but that's no justification. But that would be humanitarian intervention. Eliminating, take, say, Cuba, one of the worst atrocities of the modern age. The whole world, literally, is opposed strongly to what we're doing. Last vote at the UN was 184-2. Israel has to go along with the U.S. because it's client state. They do what we say. Nobody else would. Does it make any difference? Does it even get reported? I mean, just tighten the grips, to punish them for standing up to us for what the State Department back in the 60s called successful defiance of U.S. policies going back to the Monroe Doctrine in the 1820s. We're not going to let anybody get away with that. No, make up all sorts of stories about human rights, if you like. There are human rights abuses in Cuba. In fact, some of the worst in the hemisphere. They're taking place in the southeast corner of Cuba, a place called Guantanamo, which the U.S. took at gunpoint, refuses to give back. Probably the worst human rights, certainly way beyond any human rights in Cuba, maybe in the hemisphere. Okay, so yes, let's stop violating human rights viciously in places we've stolen from Cuba at gunpoint and maintain, because it holds a major port and it prevents Cuban development and therefore harms the Cuban people. So maybe they'll overthrow their government. Okay, we can stop all of that. That'd be humanitarian intervention. You can look around the world and find endless things like that. Actual humanitarian intervention, it barely exists. There's a lot of scholarship on this, incidentally, and I've reviewed a lot of it. It's very hard to find an authentic case of humanitarian intervention. Of course, every great power action is called humanitarian. That's universal. When Hitler invaded Poland, it was to protect people from the wild terror of the Poles. In fact, if we had records from Attila the Hun, it would probably be humanitarian. Okay, but we can put that aside. Look at the actual cases. Really hard to find an authentic one in the entire historical record. States are not moral agents. It's more, they act for the interests of their own dominant classes, overwhelmingly. You can find a few exceptions here and there, like Bush's health program in Africa. But you really have to look hard.
If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.